Welcome to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. My name is Alex Weiser. I'm the Director of Public Programs of YIVO, and we're so pleased to have you here with us for today's lecture with Professor Michael Lukin, Musical Pripetshik, Lyrics and Melodies of Traditional Yiddish Folk Songs. This lecture is a part of our Yiddish Civilization lecture series, which brings together the learning of our Yiddish summer program with our public programs. For those that don't know, YIVO is a very special place for the celebration and contemplation of Jewish history and Jewish culture. We have a library and archive with over 23 million documents and over 400,000 books, which are used by researchers around the world. And we bring the world of those collections to life through our education programs, through our public programs like this, and through exhibitions. We're very pleased to have with us Professor Michael Lukin of the Jewish Music Research Center at Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Professor Lukin researches the traditional culture of Yiddish speakers from various perspectives, the ethnomusicological, the folkloristic, and the historical. His recent publications in Pauline, Shofar, Oxford Handbook of Slavic and East European Folklore, and Music Traditions illuminate the music and poetics of Yiddish folk songs and the history of their scholarship. Over the past 4 years, as a Polanski Fellow in Oxford and a Mandel Sholion postdoctoral fellow at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, he is engaged in extensive exploration of additional aspects of Jewish Eastern European music and folklore, including semiotics of various genres, their historical developments, as well as their encounters with non-Jewish traditions. Lukin teaches courses on music and folklore in the Yiddish-speaking cultural realm, Hasidic musical thought, and music by Jews at the Hebrew University and Bar Ilan University. This year, he has been a fellow at the Katz Center for Advanced Judaic Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, working on his new project about Hasidic nigunim. Before I hand it over to Professor Lukin, David Brown, our academic director of the summer program, do you have any words you'd like to add?
Yeah, I will just say in Yiddish that mir begrüßen sehr herzlich Dr. Lukin, danke Ruben und verteidigt in der Serie, das ist das 4. Jahr der Serie. Und wir gucken sehr aus sehr baldige Lektion.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your introduction, for your warm words, and for the invitation to participate in this great YIVO program. We are living in a most difficult time. The thoughts about the hostages and the numerous bereaved families accompany many of us in every action we take. And at the same time, it is our duty to deepen and pass on to future generations the knowledge about the Jewish spirit and about the Yiddish creation, music, and poetry throughout the centuries in both better and more difficult times. And this is why I am truly grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this important effort. I'll share the presentation and we will start. Pripetshik, the traditional oven, is the best image to represent the phenomenon of traditional singing in Yiddish. First, this is the most central, cozy, and respected place in a Jewish home in a shtetl. Enjoying the Pripetshik was an integral, everlasting part of Jewish life, just as singing was. Second, most of the Yiddish folk songs preceding the period of modernization were created and performed here, inside Jewish homes, in the shtetlach, while cooking or doing other domestic work. In this aspect, Yiddish folk songs differed from most of the co-territorial Slavic repertoires. Significant parts of Belarusian, Ukrainian, or Polish folk songs were created collectively outside during agricultural work. Ancient agricultural traditions and customs had a strong impact on the musical and poetical choices characteristic of these Slavic repertoires. Yet, in most geographical areas and during most historical periods, Jews, unlike their Christian neighbors, were not allowed to reside in villages and work the land. Therefore, the practice of loud collective singing accompanying, for instance, harvest was not known in Eastern Ashkenazi culture, or maybe was known only as a non-Jewish musical practice. So, the Pripetshik is the most central place in a Jewish home, and it is where numerous Yiddish songs were created and performed. But the most salient feature connecting it with the folk song tradition is the multiplicity of associations. This image raises numerous connotations. It is both a fireplace and heating system, a warm bed, and the core of the home where many shtetl residents spent the happiest moments of their lives. In the traditional Yiddish repertoire, the Pripetshik is represented as a hint to the unrevealed, secret, and unseen. This association arises from the peculiarity of this large construction. Inside it burns a strong fire, and yet this fire cannot be seen from the outside. This is exactly how the folk song introduces the Pripetshik. For example, the maidservant Dvosje in Mendele Moicher Sforim's play Priziv sings such a folk song. 1 minute. Auf ein Pripetshik brennt a Feierl und außen Koimendel geht a Räuch. Als ich der Mon in mein Bescherten sich, verliere ich euch dem Kopf und dem Moich. A fire is burning in the stove and smoke flows from the chimney. When I think of my beloved, I lose my mind and consciousness. Just as nobody sees the real fire inside the Pripetshik, but only the smoke hints at its existence, so nobody can understand the sufferings of the betrayed lover. This simple four-line stanza also has an additional meaning. It contrasts the tranquil, indifferent, and objective everyday life, symbolized by the mundane chimneys, with highly charged personal emotions. Such antithetical parallelism, as well as the theme of existential sadness, links songs like this to the co-territorial Slavic songs about unrequited love. On top of all this, the melodies of most such songs usually follow an old Western European structural pattern, bringing in a special flavor of centuries-long collective experience and musical remoteness from Eastern European non-Jewish repertoires. Such multiplicity of subtexts characterizes many traditional Yiddish folk songs. Their beauty lies in a combination of different associations, understandable only to insiders. Several versions of the folk songs incorporating this imagery have been documented since the second half of the 19th century and up to the post-Holocaust decades. However, most of us don't know this traditional song. We are rather familiar with a song published in 1901 by the popular singer and writer Mark Varshavski, who cited the traditional expression "Auf ein Pripetshik brennt a Feierl," using it as an opening for his song. Through this citation, he creates an atmosphere of the good old days. This period, the first half of the 20th century, marks a dramatic change in the traditional music of Yiddish speakers. Old repertoires rapidly disappeared, and the worldviews they represented became less relevant. New songs sought to align with contemporary non-Jewish fashions. Varshavski's Pripetshik reflects this shift. On the one hand, it incorporates several traditional Jewish music and poetic patterns, but on the other hand, it is a Jewish paraphrase of a popular Russian song of the time, The Lesson. The lyrics of this song are a Russian translation of a French chanson by one of the most famous songwriters of the 19th century, Pierre Béranger. Here is his picture. In his chanson, Béranger tells the story of a retired soldier who teaches small children under a tree. The teacher explains the importance of acquiring education, links education to national consciousness, and promises a flower to every successful student. Very similar ideas and expressions can be found in Varshavski's song, which starts "Auf ein Pripetshik brennt a Feierl und ein Stub ist heiß" Und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinder dem Aleph Beis. A fire burns in the oven, and the room is warm, and the teacher is teaching little children the alphabet. The following words by Varshavski, such as, "Children, when you grow older, you will understand how many tears are contained in these letters and how much weeping," or "Say it again and again, Kometz Aleph O," or "The one of you who understands Hebrew fastest will get a flag." All these words clearly echo Beranger's words in yellow on my slide. ABCD, without crying, without tears, children, read and you will receive flowers. Varshavski's audience, Yiddish speakers at the beginning of the 20th century, understood these references well. Sholem Aleichem, for instance, mentions that Varshavski was called the Yiddisher Beranger, the Jewish Beranger. The power of Varshavski's Pripetshik lies in its cultural translation. Instead of providing yet another Yiddish translation of the famous French-Russian song, he incorporated traits of contemporary ideologies and fashions, as well as the musical and poetic motifs of traditional Yiddish folk songs. I propose that we listen now to a short excerpt from Varshavski's song and try to decide, do we perceive it as a representation of modernity or tradition? Let's listen to it.
Pripetshik brennt a fire, und in Stob is heiß, und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinder nach dem Aleph Beis, und der Rebbe lernt kleine Kinder nach dem Aleph Beis. Sehtche Kinder nach, gedenktche Tage, was ihr lernt da. Sagtche noch amul, Tage noch amul, kometz Aleph O. Sagtche noch amul, und Tage noch amul, kometz Aleph O.
The rest of my talk will focus on the old musical Pripetshik, those songs that we hardly know and that differ stylistically from the Yiddish songs created in the 20th century. According to testimonies, the most prominent genre in a traditional shtetl comprised lyrical songs, centering on emotions, usually performed alone, for oneself, without an audience. This performance context encouraged the emergence of several stylistic features. First, these lyrical songs typically lack a refrain, because refrains are usually made for collective singing, and singing without an audience makes them unnecessary. Another characteristic feature of lyrical songs is their rhythmic flexibility and a peculiar way of performance, allowing a high degree of improvisation. These songs do not develop any particular plot or narrative, but rather express feelings, with the singer recalling these feelings associatively. As a result, there are many versions of the same songs, with both the order and number of stanzas differing. An additional interesting feature is the frequent use of diminutives, as in an intimate private conversation with a friend or a loved person. Pripetshik, Feirel, Koimendel, Ligalech, Taibelech, Teichele, Beimele, Ljubenke, etc. And of course, there is a highly frequent use of metaphors, as in the lyrical folk song mentioning the Pripetshik. We will listen to a concert arrangement of one such folk song in which the singer is accompanied by an orchestra. This setting was not, needless to say, the traditional way of performance, and I chose it not only because it is a beautiful masterpiece sung by one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, Misha Alexandrovich, but also to introduce you to the central problem related to the documentation of this repertoire. We have some 7,000 song texts collected mainly in the first half of the 20th century, approximately 3,000 musical notations of tunes, and just a few ethnographic audio recordings. Most of the extant audio recordings of traditional lyrical songs are not ethnographic field recordings, but rather late artistic interpretations of the old musical notations. In this aspect, the extant documentation of Yiddish folk singing differs dramatically from that of most other European song traditions. A minute. No. So let's look at the lyrics of this lyrical song. As you can see on the slide, the order of the stanzas is not obligatory. Each performer can decide how to organize them. I'll read the words and you will understand what I'm saying. Near the river grows a tree with branches on its spread. You talk to everyone, are friendly to all, only I am told to keep silent. The next stanza, near the river grows a tree with flowers blooming bright. I ask you, my love, when will you come? Will you ever come? And the next one, near the river grows a tree with leaves rustling free. Oh, I ask you, my love, will you come one day? You always postpone for a later time. So each performer can decide how to organize the stanzas, whether the leaves or the flowers come first, probably depending on the imagined sort of tree. This is, I believe so. Similarly to the previous lyrical song, each stanza is built of two halves. On one hand, a description of a beautiful blossoming tree in the opening semi-stanzas, and on the other hand, a description of a suffering, lonely lover. This comparison between nature and emotions is emphasized through the subdivision of the first half stanza. Each stanza opens with an image of a tree and then focuses on a particular inner detail of this blossoming. This choice underscores, once again, the contrast between the outer impression and the inner emotional world, as if proclaiming, don't make judgments based on first impressions, but rather try to delve into the soul. The subdivision of the stanza into two halves is emphasized through musical means. Note that the melody of the second half, we will hear it very soon, just now. So the melody of the second half always starts with higher notes, and the last two verses are always sung twice, reinforcing the focus on the inner world. The last feature I'd like us to pay attention to is the rhythmic asymmetry. In every stanza, the third line has many more syllables than the other lines. This means that these words are always sung much quicker to somehow preserve the overall metric scheme. For example, look at the number of the syllables. By a teichele wächst a beimele, 10 syllables in the first line. Wachsen auf ihm Zweigen, only 6 syllables. Mit allemen reizt du, mit allemen bist du freundlich, 14 syllables in the third line. Nor mir heißt du schweigen, again 6 syllables in the fourth line. Not only does the number of syllables change between the lines and stanzas, but also the order of stresses. The stressed syllables are emphasized. For example, I'll read this stanza to demonstrate this rhythmic asymmetry. Bei a teichele wächst a beimele, ta 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 ta. And then an absolutely different rhythm. Wachsen auf ihm Zweigen, ta 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 ta. And then mit allemen redst du, mit allemen bist du freundlich. Nur mir heißt du schweigen. This rhythm is absolutely asymmetrical. Not a single line repeats any of the preceding ones. Such rhythmic flexibility links traditional lyrical songs with old German songs everyday Yiddish speech, and the rhythms of Old Sabbath, Hebrew Aramaic table chants, Zmiras. All these were marked by similar rhythmic asymmetry, although the reasons, of course, differ in each case. So let's listen to this song. Such songs about unrequited love were documented in all areas of Jewish settlement in Eastern Europe, from Lithuania in the north to Bessarabia in the south. The multiplicity of their versions and the large amount of lyrics and melodies collected through fieldwork testify to the centuries-long history of this genre. This long history of singing love songs is attested by Tzvi Hirsch-Koidanover in his most popular bilingual Hebrew-Yiddish book, Kav HaYosher. Koidanover not only confirms the common practice of everyday domestic singing in the second half of the 16th century, but also hints at the problematic content of these songs according to his view. He discusses the concept of possession, where a sinful soul of a deceased person unable to move on to either paradise or hell due to major sins committed during their lifetime possesses the bodies of living individuals. This possession is permitted by the upper worlds because of minor sins or misconduct by the victims. This phenomenon was known as ruach in the 16th century and later as dibek. I'm reading from Koidanover's Kava Yosher. He says, and anyway, it, the ruach or dibek, had not been allowed to possess any person until it came to pass that this woman came to prepare fire and wood to cook for the Sabbath day. And the woman was singing bawdy songs, and it was allowed to possess her. And since then, 3 years continuously, it has dwelled inside her. This is the story. Now, the same story about the dibek possessing a woman preparing meals has appeared in various versions since the second half of the 16th century. However, all versions printed outside the Eastern Ashkenazi world attributed the dibek's possession of a woman to different faults and sins, excluding singing. Instead, these versions cited offenses like cursing or carelessly striking a spark from a flint at the coals. It is clear that by reinterpreting the case as related to female singing, Koidanover reacted to the Polish-Lithuanian reality. What was the song that he had in mind? It is quite possible that the designation bawdy songs, and especially the phrasing hat Hurenlieder gesungen, and she sang whorish songs, that is used in the Yiddish part of Kava Yosher, implies the love theme. Indeed, the performer, a woman cooking the Sabbath meals, appears to be quite normative, not a lawbreaker or a big sinner. In all probability, she used to sing regular Yiddish folk songs about the unrequited love. According to 19th century testimonies, this repertoire of songs performed by servant maidens during domestic work was prevalent in Jewish shtetls. Many such songs borrowed various elements from older Western European and especially German folk songs and creatively adapted them to the aesthetic ideals of their Slavic surroundings. This mechanism of folk creativity reflects a combination of two contrasting values: cultural conservatism and admiration for the old, alongside a keen interest in innovation. I would describe this blend of conservatism and cultural dialogue with neighbors as the desire to find a suitable place for the traditional Pripetshik in every new home. We observe this blend not only in lyrical songs, but also in religious chants. We will now listen to a trilingual Hebrew, Yiddish, Polish song that describes a walk in the forest and the chirping of birds. In this song, the birds are chanting verses from the liturgical poem recited at the Havdalah ceremony at the end of Sabbath, Adir, Oyoim Venoiro, awful, almighty, and terrible. Each new stanza of the song depicts the birds singing a different verse from the Hebrew chant. Here is how it looks. Okay. The meaning of the words in the three languages, Hebrew, Yiddish, and Polish, is the same. Once I was walking through the woods and observed the birds chirping. One of them sang, and then the syllables that the birds are chirping vary, depending on the Hebrew verses from the liturgical poem. In the first stanza, the birds sing ro ro ro, Adir Oyoim Venoiro, meaning ro ro ro, awful, almighty, and terrible. In the second stanza, the birds sing Li li li, Gidor Pirza Seicholi, meaning Li li li, repair the loophole in my temple. And in the third stanza, that opens with the Polish words, the birds sing Si 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 hen ato sikvosi, which means Si si si, you are all my hope. Every stanza is followed by a refrain in Yiddish Gut Woch, sung to a different melody. This folk song, therefore, combines four languages: Hebrew, Yiddish, Polish, and the bird's language. What does all this mean? Why combine languages? Who and when approximately could have composed it? Before we listen to this song, which has been recorded in about a dozen different versions, let's examine its structure. The Hebrew part is, in fact, the only part that varies from stanza to stanza. It is a piyut structured according to an alphabetical acrostic. As you can see, each verse starts with a different letter of the alphabet. Aleph in the word Adir, and then Bet, Gimel, Dalet, etc. The third verse in each stanza, following the first two lines, always starts with the word Hashem. This is a very old Ashkenazi liturgical poem, documented as early as the Machzor Vitri of the 12th century. Scholars have managed to trace the transformations of this song over 400 years. The Yiddish lyrics, Ich bin gegangen in dem Wald singen Vögel jung und alt, are a quotation from a German folk song documented in the 16th century. In the German original, the birds sang about love. The Ashkenazi innovation was the combination of these German Yiddish words from a love song with a holy piyut. This new bilingual song became highly popular and much liked, reaching the Ashkenazi community in Italy and being brought there for print. However, while printing it, the combination of the mundane Yiddish and the elevated Hebrew verses didn't seem appropriate. This was the reason the Yiddish words were translated into Hebrew to emphasize that the folk song is absolutely kosher. This is how the Hebrew opening appeared. We can see it here. And this is a rare case of the Yiddish origin of Hebrew lyrics. In such a way, the printed version became monolingual, with all the components except the meaningless syllables pronounced by the birds in the holy tongue only. However, the folk oral tradition tended to emphasize the interlingual play, and to do this without contradicting the printed source, the Yiddish opening was kept in actual performances. When this folk song arrived in the Eastern Ashkenazi communities, the Polish component was added. This Polish component is unnecessary for translation, since Yiddish speakers clearly understood both Yiddish and Hebrew better than Polish. The function of the Polish part was apparently not translation, but rather to enhance the existing interplay of languages and emphasize the multicultural context. It represents a further development of the linguistic pun that began with interpreting the birds chirping as a prayer and evolved through the combination of Yiddish and Hebrew. When beginning a new week at the end of Sabbath, performers of this song immersed themselves in the diverse cultural contexts in which they lived and created. In this forest, Jews felt at home, as even the local birds could sing Hebrew verses. However, the forest was not only Jewish but also Polish. This blend of the holy tongue, the mundane vernacular, and the foreign language created a kaleidoscopic, panoramic worldview, suggesting that the surrounding landscapes were complex and called for further exploration. This complex image is supported musically. The melody of the refrain strongly differs from the melody of the stanzas. As with previous examples, the beauty of these songs lies in its rich associations. It references an old German song, hinting at the Ashkenazi past, a Hebrew piyut that speaks of the messianic future, and it incorporates the bird's language representing nature, beauty, and the mystery of creation. And finally, it contains the joyful refrain, Gut Woch, reflecting the familiar present. The lyrics and sounds of this folk song also clearly demonstrate a combination of conservatism with innovation and an openness to non-Jewish surroundings. I'll share the words and we will listen to this song. Okay, let's listen to it.
פעם ביער הולכתי, קול ציפורים שמעתי, אחד מצפצף רו רו רו, אדיר אויום בנוירו, בצר לי לכו אקרו, השם לי ולא אירו, רו 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 רו. Ay 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 mam 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 ay 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 mam 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 gut Woch ay 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 mam 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 ay 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 mam mam gut Woch ay ay mam 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 ay 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 mam mam gut Woch Mazel tov, ay ay ay, mam, gut Woch, Mazel tov. Ich bin gegangen in den Wald, singen Fegelach jung und alt, einer singt li li li, gdoir pilzas hei choli, dogumai chach li li, Hashem heyei, oizer li, li 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 li. Ay 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 mam 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 gut Woch ay 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 mam 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 gut Woch ay ay mam ay ay mam gut Woch ay mama ay ay mam gut Woch Rozchodziłem w lesie, śpiewają wróbli na drzewie, jeden śpiewa si si si, hein a to si kwosi, Elishu oschodzi wisi, Hashem oiz Yeshua si 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 si. Ay 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 mam gut Woch ay 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 gut Woch gut Woch gut Woch.
This song is part of a large repertoire of Yiddish folk paraphrases. These paraphrases are folk improvisations based on Hebrew canonical sacred texts. As you know, this is quite an old Ashkenazi genre. Evidence of its existence can be found in the 15th century Pesach Gada, which features the song Almechti Kergot. This song is a folk paraphrase of the Hebrew Piyut Adir Hu. The paraphrase was so popular that it became one of the earliest printed Yiddish texts, appearing in the Haggadah of 1526 that we see on the slide. The practice of singing paraphrases flourished over the centuries. They were often performed during times of transition, such as the end of the Sabbath, the end of the Passover Seder, Simchas Toire, which marks the end of the autumn festivals, or weddings, which are significant transitional events. During these periods, a fresh perspective on norms of conduct and on the sacred and profane was encouraged, allowing for a temporary re-examination of well-known sacred texts. Paraphrases became especially widespread due to a distinctive feature of Eastern Ashkenazi culture, the high literacy rates and constant exposure to Hebrew and Yiddish texts. This environment fostered a particular joy in intertextuality. We already saw a similar intertextuality in the previous song. However, sometimes it appears in a more subtle, sophisticated manner. Recognizing the Hebrew source of a Yiddish paraphrase was always seen as a form of humor. We will now listen to a paraphrase of a song that I am sure you all know. This paraphrase introduces a typical musical form widely accepted in this repertoire. It is comprised of 3 segments. The first is usually performed solo in a higher register. The second consists of repeating motives, and the third, performed by the community or some folk choir, a group of singers, differs rhythmically from the previous segments and features lower notes. All the stanzas in the song that we will hear follow this tripartite musical form. However, since this performance is an arrangement and not a real field recording, you will notice a modern addition. The arranger, who did excellent work here, sensed that for the needs of a commercial recording, the song might sound a little too monotonous. Therefore, he added a refrain. No refrain is found in the original written notation, but it definitely adds coloration. This refrain appears after every 2 stanzas, making this a wonderful example of the contemporary encounter with a traditional heritage. Okay, so let's listen to this song.
בכל מקום שהוא zwei, zwei, zwei wer weiß was ist zwei zwei seinen Hossen kalle zu wie sie tanzen alle es ist der Kodesh Baruch Hu was mir sagen sie wogen בכל מקום שהוא בכל מקום שהוא I sing Jeune der Bär bin Jeune der Schwer dann Jeune der Hai balle balle like es la 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 בכל מקום שהוא, בכל מקום שהוא. Drei, 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 wer weiß was sie drei? Drei seinen Dickleis Morim, wo sie mit am Meer, sie kennen ohne Orim. Zwei seinen Hosten kalle, zu wie sie tanzen alle. Es ist der Kodesh Baruch Hu, was mir sagen, sie wogen, בכל מקום שהוא, בכל מקום שהוא. Vier, 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 nu wer weiß was ist vier ha. Wir seinen dem Chotonim, was sie haben, dem Solmonim. Zwei seinen Dickleis Morim, wo sie mit am Meer, sie kennen ohne Orim. Zwei seinen Hosten kalle, zu wie sie tanzen alle. Es ist der Kodesh Baruch Hu, was mir sagen, sie wogen, מקום שהוא, בכל מקום שהוא. I sing Jeune der Bär, bin Jeune der Schwer, dann Jeune der Hai, balle, balle, like es. Dai, dai, da, la, 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 da, la, 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 da, la, la, la. Dai, dai, da, la, 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 da, la, la, da, la, la, la. בכל מקום שהוא, בכל מקום שהוא.
To conclude, the musical Pripetshik evolved over centuries. I focused on just a few characteristic features of this phenomenon. We examined songs from 2 different repertoires. Wait a minute, I just stop sharing so that, okay. So we examined songs from 2 different repertoires, lyrical songs and paraphrases. Both are now rarely found outside mass media or the concert stage. Indeed, the lyrics of both types of songs are difficult to sing in the frameworks that exist today. Typically, encounters with these songs take place in educational settings and in groups. However, traditional songs are hard to perform collectively due to their prosodic feature, flexible rhythms, and in the case of multilingual paraphrases, the multiplicity of languages less known beyond the cultural realm of the Eastern European shtetl. Popular Yiddish songs, which further develop the aesthetic foundations laid by Varshavski and his contemporaries, are much closer to our taste. They usually have a clear message, regular rhyme, stable rhythm, and can be performed with instrumental accompaniment, a practice never documented in traditional Eastern Ashkenazi society. Because of these challenges, it is sometimes quite hard to comprehend the unique beauty of the old traditional songs, especially because this beauty can only be revealed when both lyrics and tunes are considered together. A closer examination of these components shows that the following values were especially appreciated: the old, the complex, and the intertextual. I hope that in the near future, the idea of historically informed performance will become widely recognized and accepted, and these lesser-known traditional Yiddish songs will become accessible to all of us, sung without the guitar or accordion, allowing us to experience their special flavor. In the meantime, we can enjoy the rich archival collections at YIVO, in Kiev, and in Israel. I will stop here. Thank you so much for your attention and patience.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. And it was fantastic to hear these examples you brought in. I love that last one. It's a very charming arrangement. So we have some questions from the audience. And if you have a question, please note it into the Q&A function, and we'll get to it if we have time. The first question actually is someone who has a particular song that they remember from their childhood, and they want to know if other people know it. So we can't really address that without hearing it, I don't think, because a lot of the words that are shared here are just kind of regular lullaby words. But I wonder if we could take this as a jumping off point to just tell people a little bit more about some of the places that they can learn about Yiddish folk song. You know, you mentioned the resources we have at YIVO, other things that exist throughout the world and in Israel. Maybe you could speak a little bit to that question.
About the resources. Yeah. So you mentioned the lullaby, and this is an image, I can say, a perception that the largest repertoire in the Yiddish folk singing are lullabies. In fact, traditional lullabies are quite few, and we have recordings of such lullabies at the National Sound Archives at the National Library in Israel. And also, of course, you at YIVO have this beautiful collection of Ruth Rubin. And there we find a few traditional lullabies, which are really interesting. They also preserve old Germanic patterns, poetical patterns, and the images of, you know, of the golden Ziegele, how you say this, I forgot the word, but it is very interesting that in the Eastern Ashkenazi society, in lullabies, the music was perceived as especially important, unlike the Slavic lullabies, in which the words were perceived as of magical power. So when listening to these archival recordings in Israel collections and also at the YIVO collections, we find that the melodies remind klezmer tunes very often. And probably the reason for this is that the lullabies fulfill the function of introducing before the baby the world of the Jewish adults and the wedding. And, you know, klezmer music is related to weddings. So thanks to these archival recordings, we can reconstruct the historical development of these traditional lullabies. We can we can study this corpus, which is not very large, but is very interesting. And if we didn't have the access to, and it's very important to mention that the Ruth Rubin collection is available online. And if you don't know, it's really a treasure. In Israel, not all the songs are available online, but also here in Jerusalem, we have some recordings that can be heard through the catalog of the National Library. But what I wanted to mention that through listening to these rare archival recordings, we can really feel how the lullaby works and how all the other traditional song really impact and emotionally transfer some meaning.
And I put into the chat the link to Yivo's Ruth Rubin website, which is a great, very easy to use interface. But it's also, I definitely recommend the National Library of Israel has a lot of this material digitized. It's definitely worth checking out. And hopefully our viewers can go find the songs that they remember from their childhood. Here's another question about love songs. And this viewer asks, was this tradition of singing of unrequited love always directed to or about another person, or was it sometimes directed to God? And that, recalls Shir HaShirim, which is, love poetry, which is always thought to, in a traditional context, be about God. So I wonder if you have any comment about that, and perhaps you could take this to just talk a little bit about what these love songs, what this repertoire teaches us actually about Eastern European Jewish life.
Okay, this is a very good question. Thank you so much. So most of the love songs are directed to the human love and usually this is unrequited love. So the boy promised a lot and then he disappeared. And usually these are songs that are sung from the speaker is a female speaker. However, I'm very happy that you asked this question because it allows me to mention a very interesting paraphrase ascribed to Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk of the 18th century, and he used the secular love song. And he made of it really a love song for in a religious love song. This is a love to God or longing for Shekhinah maybe. So the secular song says, if I had wings, I would fly to you, and if I had a horse, I would ride to you. And just the same words are sung with a completely different intention as describing the longing for the Shekhinah. And this is interesting because this is the example that demonstrates that the boundaries between the secular repertoires and the religious repertoires can be crossed. And also boundaries between female songs and male songs, because Hasidic singing was primarily male repertoire. So it did happen. Probably we just lack the sufficient documentation. Maybe this is the only case that is known to me and that reached our era, but probably there were more. We just don't know. Yeah, so this is the answer about the love songs. And what was the additional point that you mentioned?
Well, I was thinking about your writing in the Pauline journal, that this question of what the existence of these love songs, it sheds some light on our understanding of this historical period in terms of romance itself and the Jewish population. I wonder if you could just share a word about that.
Yeah, so usually the stereotypical, image of shtetl is that the marriage was made only by contract with the Batchen and no romantic love existed. And then the scholars and the collectors documented thousands of love songs. And it is clear that such a large amount of love songs couldn't have appeared just in a few decades. So this is the tradition that it developed through centuries. And so this is an evidence for the existence of the romantic love, because if the feeling was not familiar to all these young people who performed the songs, they would not have created them. And so the historical explanation for this phenomenon is that only the girls from rich families would have be married in the early young ages, but other poorer girls had to work and to earn money for their future life. So the age of marriage was could be 20 plus something, and in these ages, probably these were the people who developed this beautiful repertoire of love songs, usually performed to, as I said, in the kitchen, to oneself, and in a very intimate way.
Fascinating. And so there are, in the same way, there are other songs that reflect on, the historical reality of their singers. And one viewer is asking about that. Were the social and political realities of each area reflected in the songs? In other words, were there differences in themes among the Ashkenazis of Lithuania versus of Bessarabia? So maybe you can answer that question, and also just reflect on this idea of history being reflected in this repertoire.
Thank you. An excellent question. First, I wish I could answer such a question. We lack the documentation on the one hand. The documentation is partial, and there are huge areas, for example, Belarus. We have very few songs from there, or Hungary, or some areas of Ukraine. But on the other hand, we have very close versions from Lithuania and Bessarabia of the same songs. So this is also a very interesting aspect of this tradition, that it is transnational or transregional. Rather, this is a large tradition that crosses the political and the geographical borders, rather than collection of local regional traditions. And in this aspect, it also differs from the Slavic surrounding songs, because obviously songs of Western Ukraine differ from those of Eastern Ukraine. But Jews, because they were much less connected to the land, as I mentioned, and to the agricultural works, so they could travel and migrate much more than their Slavic neighbors, and the music and the songs traveled with them, and this is how actually the intonations and motives from the south, which is very close to Ottoman Empire and the Ottoman world, reached the northern areas of Lithuania. And this is very interesting how you can suddenly hear some Balkan motives in the Lithuanian regions.
Fascinating. We're just up to our time, so maybe we'll end with one question. One last question. This is from Miriam Borden. She asks, I'm wondering about the transformation you mentioned from folk to the stage. How did musicians select songs to publish in songbooks and to perform in concert halls? Did it simply come down to songs that were easy to sing and remember? Do you have any comments or any thoughts on this transformation from folk repertoire to adaptations for stage performance?
Yeah, wow, an interesting question. Hi, Miriam, thanks for coming. Okay, so there were various ideologies behind this transformation. So the composers and the arrangers had to decide which song do we perform now. Not every song was suitable. So, for example, the song that we played here about the Teichele, the river and the tree, it was found very suitable because it describes the Slavic nature. And this arrangement was made in the Soviet Union, so it suited the new Soviet ideology that every nations and all the nations and all the people of the Soviet Union sing the same. But many other songs were left and not arranged for the stage because the landscape that they described was more suitable for shtetl and with no trees, no rivers. So they were left behind. And I think the impact of ideologies, what suits the current fashion and what would just sell, because this arrangement were made for the stage and also for the commercial recording. So the commercial questions are also important. I think these were the factors for the choice of the songs and also for the ways of their arrangement.
Thank you so much. This has been an absolutely fascinating lecture. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Alex. Pleasure.